So yeah, good evening, everyone. Thank you so much for being here today and for taking time out to take part in this conversation. My name is JC Candanido. I'm a proud gay man and my pronouns are he, him. I'm a member of Out for Good, which is a charitable organization bringing together LGBTQI plus people across the UK to celebrate our visibility and to work to break down barriers by making a difference in our communities. As you know, February is LGBT History Month in the UK. And today's event is a community conversation about what being queer means to us as individuals, but also how we fit as LGBTQI plus people in our societies. I'm really, really excited about the beautiful panel that we have here, formed by people from all over the world, from very different backgrounds and very diverse age groups. They will be sharing with us their experiences of growing up queer, with coming out anecdotes, stories about finding love and dealing with family, work, and the world in general. I just want to begin with a few housekeeping guidelines in case this is the first time that you join a live stream or a webinar. If you see at the bottom of the screen, you should see a bottom bar, and then there's a button that says chat. If you're joining from a mobile device, you might have to press, just touch the screen slightly, and then this bar will reveal. And in that chat box, please feel free to place comments or questions for the panel, and we will try to answer as many as we can at the end of the conversation. Please bear in mind that this is a safe space for all the panelists where they can share without any judgment. So we ask you to please respect their opinions and experiences, because even if we all belong to the same community, every LGBTQI plus person is different, and we all see life in a very different way. Also, we have different backgrounds and we all come from different parts of the world where things might not be seen the same way that they're seen in our own cultures. The entire session is going to be recorded and it will be made available on the Out for Good website and also on our other social channels. So if you have to leave early, or if you want to watch the replay, or if you want to share the event with someone else, you will be able to do so. So please just follow Out for Good on our social media channels, which you can find on our website, outforgood.co.uk, and we'll let you know when the video is available to watch. Also, we will send an email to everyone who has joined in today, where they will have all this information. So again, thank you so much for participating in this important intergenerational conversation, where the aim is to explore our identity and our place in our communities. Let me see the chat box quickly to see where people are joining from. We have people here today from every part of London. Also, we have people from 4 continents right now joining, people from America, from Africa, from Europe, and from Asia, which is fascinating. So thank you so much. We see you wherever you are, and we feel you part of our extended LGBTQI plus family. So grab something to drink, get comfortable, and enjoy the conversation. Before I ask the panelists to introduce themselves and to tell us what does being queer mean to them, I wanted to share my own personal experience with the word queer. And the first time that I heard the word queer, it was in the early 80s. I must have been around 10 or 11. And I saw this magazine that my parents were reading. And in the magazine, there was an article where it was more like a short story, where a boy asked his dad, what did the word queer mean? And the dad said the word queer refers to the gays. So now I had 2 words that I didn't know what they meant, the word queer and the word gay. So this is the pre-internet era. I went and I looked for that book. I don't know if you guys remember, the dictionary. And I looked for the word queer, and it said strange, odd, weird, different. And then I looked for the word gay, and the word gay said happy. And that only added to my confusion. And fast forward to maybe when I was in my early teens, just a little before I came out to my family, I already knew that the words queer and gay meant a homosexual person. And I knew that I was a homosexual, but the word queer was always associated with an insult, with a slur. And there were a lot of like bad words that were told to people like me by family members, by classmates or neighbors or friends. So I didn't want to use that word queer because it felt like I didn't relate to the word. So I started using the word gay because I guess I just wanted to be happy. But now at 45, I have revisited that word and I have reclaimed it into my vocabulary, because now for me, queer means community. Because when I see our beautiful community and I see all those letters, LGBTQI+, I see a lot of segmentation. But the word queer for me encapsulates all of them. And to me, that's what the word queer means. So now I'm going to ask the panelists to share their own experiences about what the word queer means to them. Let's begin with Peter. Peter, would you like to introduce yourself and tell us what queer means to you?
My name is Peter Stredder. I live in East Central London with my partner Andy. We've been together for the best part of 20 years. I still find the word queer quite problematic. I grew up at a time when it was illegal to be gay. And I was 18 when the law was finally changed. I had some experiences growing up which made me very concerned that I might be gay, and very keen to try to have a normal life. And I was actually married for 20 odd years. I mean, one of the things that perhaps illustrates why it was so problematic at that time is that I worked in the civil service, the British government, for the first 13 years of my career. Part of that was working in a minister's office, and to work in a minister's office, you had to be positively vetted. And to be successfully positively vetted, you couldn't be gay because that meant you were a security risk. And I worked in a minister's office, and we used to be in touch with other ministers' offices. And I remember one day asking for another young civil servant in another minister's office, is he there? His boss said, no, he's not working in this office anymore. And I said, oh, why is that? He said, he had his positive vetting, PB, and they discovered that he's not like other men are. There were very, very negative connotations about the word being queer for the first 50 years of my life, I suppose. It gradually became more acceptable to be gay, but for me, it's still a troubling word that I understand the logic of those who've reclaimed it, but for me, it's still a troubling word.
Totally understandable. And it wasn't that long ago, which is really scary. How about you, Tom?
Hello, yes. So for me, growing up, gay was the word that was generally used as insulting, even though it was also kind of the acceptable word at the same time. Kind of growing up in school, everyone was always like, oh, that's so gay, kind of generally was used as kind of to mean something bad, something negative. And like, you know, I just like things like were said to me were more like, are you gay? And then it was like, ugh, gross kind of thing. And I think queer for me as a term, I heard more like as like, you know, something like queer literature I would hear about and be like, oh, okay, that's what queer is sort of associated as kind of like a official, or not really official, but like academic kind of language almost, like queer studies or something, you know. And I think I remember hearing about it online and sort of conversations around, is it okay to say this word or not? And just generally kind of a thing of understanding both viewpoints really, because I think, you know, I can see how some words that maybe now we would never think of, we wouldn't really think of reclaiming in the sense the way we have done with queer, like using it to, you know, say queer literature or something like that. Like you wouldn't say like faggot literature, for example, like not like in a sort of official way. So I think I can understand why it's a kind of difficult thing, but also as a personally, I do really like the word for myself because my identity is quite broad. So it's quite easy to say I'm queer and it just covers the bases of my sort of trans and sort of sexuality, queerness as well. But then also, yeah, it's complicated, I guess, with the history of the word.
Definitely, and I totally understand what you're saying. We're a community who's famous for reclaiming all those words that used to be insults in the past. How about you, Lexi?
Hi. Yeah, I mean, the word queer is both pejorative and reappropriated, and I guess for me, understanding the history of the word and the reclamation of it by some members of our community, it fits my rejection of cis heteronormative binary in regards to gender and sexuality. So, identifying as queer is both politically and personally a useful term for me to reject those traditional ideas of what is masculine and what is feminine in terms of expression of gender and sexuality. So for me, is also, I feel, a challenge, a political statement for the receiver in sort of normative spaces, and that it challenges what is it to be masculine? What does it really mean to be feminine? What does it mean to perform these? And sort of, yeah, so how that plays out across gender and sexuality. So the history of the word queer and how it was used, I guess, or when it started to become reclaimed in the 90s, let's say in the US in particular, I think that, it was used as an anarchist sort of term, is my understanding anyway. And I think that there's still a place for that now, today, to use that to challenge. And I guess it's just for me, it's, as our understanding and expression of gender and sexualities and how limitless the expression of these are, I can see how that it's a useful term for some people to reclaim, I guess, in Western movements, I guess. But yeah, it's a deeply personal, using the term is deeply personal. And I think we also need to be cognizant that it also doesn't translate across different communities. We're talking, of course, from a mostly Western perspective. And so now today, the term queer is being more used as an umbrella term by a lot of members of the community. But like any language and any terminology, it's going to change and evolve, and it'll be interesting to see where and how it evolves. And that's why it's really great to hear from everyone here on the panel how they interpret and use, reject, or claim the word. So
definitely, yeah. I agree, and that is why when we were putting this panel together, we were really careful in bringing people from several backgrounds, very, very varied backgrounds, and also different ages, because Peter's experience and Tom's experience are like in the opposite sides of the spectrum. Stephen reminds me that I haven't asked Tom and Lexi to introduce themselves, so I do apologize. I'm going to move on to Chico. Please, Chico, introduce yourself and tell us what queer means to you.
Absolutely. Thank you, JC. So I am Chico. I am a gay man, and my pronouns are he, him. Queer is a really interesting word. I guess I probably straddle somewhere in between Peter and Tom in terms of where it was used. And like Tom, when I was at school, the negative word was definitely gay, and I heard a lot of language which made me sort of withdraw, because I realized that I was gay and I was perfectly comfortable being gay myself. But it was something that obviously society didn't want me to be. So I guess I've always thought in terms of the word gay as being the way I would identify myself. And I was never really that uncomfortable. I think maybe part of my the fact that I'm intersectional, my family are from an Indian background, which is very visible. I therefore thought my other minority, being LGBT plus or being a gay male, was also as equally visible. So if someone asked me, I was always quite comfortable saying it. I loved what Lexi said in terms of how it's this umbrella around community, both in terms of gender identity and in terms of sexual orientation. And it's just something which people, no matter what they self-identify as, can use to come together. And I also think actually that what you were saying, Lexi, in terms of the reclamation in the 90s of that anarchist movement, for me is actually also the third use of queer is you could be politically queer. You could be someone that identifies as cisgendered, i.e. the gender that you were assigned at birth. You could identify as being heterosexual, but you could be politically queer. So that's what I love about the word, in as much as it's something that everyone can feel if they want to be a part of that community, if they do so respectfully, that it's a community that will welcome you.
Beautiful, beautiful, Chico. Thank you so much for that. Kate, would you like to introduce yourself and tell us what queer means to you?
Hi everyone, great to meet you. I'm Kate Newsome, and I currently live in Maidstone in Kent. My background is that I have a history doctorate, and but currently I'm not working in that field, though I'm kind of coming back to it again. My experience of queer is, well, I have a kind of very similar experience to Peter. In that I'm a refugee from ministerial public office as well. And curiously enough, my leaving that role coincided with my coming out. So, and I see the word queer very much like a lot of the folks here as being an umbrella, all-encompassing terms that includes the whole community. For myself, I identify as a lesbian. My pronouns are she, her. And I'm very much for reclaiming slur words. You know, I can remember being called dyke, rug muncher, and all of those horrible things. And now, you know, and I'm quite happy now to embrace those and say, I can call myself that, but God help you if you do.
That's how I've always felt. And I remember having a conversation with someone who was a straight cis woman. And when I used one of the words, she told me, we never use those words around here. And I was like, what do you mean? I'm reclaiming that word. It's mine. You can't take that word away from me.
I had the same conversation with my sister a few years ago, saying, you can't say that. Queer?
Thank you so much, Kate.
Oh, okay.
Kaita, introduce yourself, please, and tell us what queer means to you.
Hello, my name's Kavita, and I'll do an introduction, which is I'm a technologist by trade, and I run a whole bunch of organisations. But one of the organisations I run is an LGBTQ plus martial arts club in Camden. Check it out, and it will come up in this conversation. So I'm a couple of years older than JC, and so I've gone through that. So I've got a very similar relationship with the word queer and with sort of all of the components of LGBTQ plus. Unlike Tom, the slur words of when I was growing up were definitely lesbo and homo and all of those things. But I also grew up, so I grew up in Saudi Arabia, and I moved here when I was 8. And so in the classroom, thanks to Maggie Thatcher, we couldn't actually learn about being gay at all. So not only did I have no expression of it at home, I had no expression of it in the school either. And so I just assumed everyone was gay, because, you know, everyone, like, I fancied boys and I fancied girls, and I was like, everyone's gay, right? Like, and that was the word that I adopted over time. But I've actually tried really hard not to have a bucket. So I've kind of refused to sort of label myself. As we've had this whole push, and I've been part of it in HR departments to have diversity inclusion, I'm like, okay, bisexuality, I'm going to tick the box. I'm going to be, and especially around 2012, when I think that transition happened, I spent a lot of time going, right, I'm going to tick all the boxes. If we're having a census, I'm ticking the box, because I don't want to be erased out of this conversation. Chico, I'm actually still debating whether I think queer is the term that I would adopt to be inclusive. At the moment, I'm still using LGBTQ plus, because I feel the plus is really important to allies. And I really need allies to grow quite a lot of the sort of campaigns that I'm pushing forward. And so I'm kind of debating whether we could own the word queer, but then as in fact, I actually, in order to talk to you guys today, was polling people, and I don't feel that enough of the community out there yet owns that word. So I think that's something, a challenge for us all.
Yeah, definitely. And I think that whenever I'm asked that question about what the plus at the end means, and I always say the allies, I think that most allies do not really relate to the word queer, and they like seeing that plus sign there at the end. Thank you so much, Kavita. Isaac, thank you for joining us. Tell us, please, a bit about yourself and what the word queer means to you.
Thanks very much for inviting me to the panel. Orly, who is a dear friend of mine from 40 years ago, I was just doing the math. She's the one who introduced me to the panel. So we've been friends from 7th grade on. So that's a long time. Next to me is my husband, Andrew. He's always on my side. So we decided
welcome, Andrew.
the same frame. My first encounter with the word queer was when I was in first year of university, and I went to the dormitories, and somebody in a hallway told me that some other guy in a hallway is queer, and I had no understanding what it meant. Oh, sure. I was deep in the closet myself. I had no perception of it whatsoever. So then I had to go and ask a woman friend of mine, what did that mean? I know it was something derogatory. I just didn't know exactly what it meant. And she's like, oh, that means gay. So being in a closet, I made sure I had no interaction with said person ever for the rest of college. That was the extent of my experience with that. But then again, you know, as time went on, definitions changed, social norms change. And yes, you know, we have come to encompass the word queer from what it used to be or what it was meant to be. What I like about it is that it also puts people not in categories that, you know, when you say LGBT, you kind of sort of putting people into compartments, versus when you say queer, we also understand that things are a spectrum. It's not so black and white. It's all shades of different things that can happen to all of us at any given time. And even with time, things may change and progress and develop. So it's always good to have this one encompassing word that describes all of us and not just one of us.
I couldn't have said it better, Isaac.
Yeah. I'm also going to take the opportunity to play a little bit of a devil's advocate about the words LGB and T. You know, the B and the T are kind of sort of scientific words, psychological, psychiatric words. But the gay and the lesbians are not terribly complementary either. The word gay comes from happy. As much as I hope our future is happy, I don't think our past has been happy. It has not been described to really describe our past and our experience in society being persecuted. I think that was also derogatory to say, oh, well, he's gay, he's really the butt of all the jokes, and we're going to call him gay because he needs to be the class clown. And even for the word lesbian, it comes from the island of Lesbos. And this is what people in Lesbos used to do. And again, not from a society perspective, but from a linguistic perspective, it's the same thing as calling a man a sodomite. This is what people in Sodom used to do. So really the word, from a linguistic perspective, I know it's a far-fetched, but from a linguistic perspective, calling somebody from Lesbos is not different than saying somebody is from Sodom. Just linguistic. I understand society has different understanding of it, but we have embraced it. We have moved on from that. We have made it our culture. We have made it more neutral descriptions, and we have come in terms with it. And we're proud of it now. That's part of our flag. That's part of our rainbow that we are all very happy about. And going back to the LGBT, actually, we belong to an LGBT synagogue in New York, and we've had so many allies joining us more recently. Maybe about 20% of the membership are straight. So we actually had to change the acronym to LGBTS to acknowledge the straight allies who have come to have services with us, and we're actually very proud of it. Anybody coming to New York, you're all invited to come and pray with us one time.
Thank you so much, Isaac. That is really beautiful. Thank you. Let's hear from Tanisha now. Tanisha.
Hi. So I'm Tanisha, and my pronouns are she, her. And my background, I'm a mental health nurse in terms of the work I do, and I work with young people mostly. I'm also a poet, so that's been cool. It's been good to write during this weird time. But yeah, it's really good to hear what people have got to say about this word queer. And I think actually I relate more to Tom and Chico around sort of the kind of time I grew up. Gay was the word that was bandied around in terms of it being a slur. And so it's interesting, you know, for me, queer was always like a very empowered term and one that I associated with pride. And people that I met in sort of a university and later on in life would use that to describe themselves. And I'd be like, yeah, you know, it felt like it resonated and made sense to me. But it's, it's very clear generationally how things do change. And I think, again, for me, it's a term that I use to identify myself. If people ask me how to identify, I do just say queer. And I think a part of that is the anonymity. I kind of like that people don't necessarily have to know everything about me in terms of who I'm with or, you know, my gender, or, you know, it's this sort of thing. And I think I kind of, it feels like a kind of togetherness, but also, yeah, that sense where actually you don't have to know the ins and outs of my life in terms of me coming out to various people, whether it's work or new people that you meet. So it feels like quite almost like a protective term in some ways for me. And yeah, one that I don't associate with shame. And I think that feels really important. My kind of background is grew up in the UK, but brought up by my grandparents who came here from the Caribbean. And so, yeah, the words that we had at home for people like that were, I mean, yeah, I'm not going to repeat them. You can imagine. So it does feel like a queer feels like a term for me that, it suits.
I totally understand what you're saying about the shame, because that's what most of us have made feel growing up. And I think that now that we're queer, that anonymity that you speak of, it's completely relatable. Thank you so much, Tanisha, for sharing that. Lauren, how about you?
Hello, I'm Lauren Carl. As a lot of you could probably tell, I am from the States, but I do live here in London. I've lived here for about 10 years. And my background, lesbian, yeah, out and proud. And my pronouns would be she and her. I'm also I'm a performer and I'm a personal trainer, but I act, but I perform. I'm a drag king, and then I do like magic and burlesque. So I do a lot in the cabaret scene. So when I'm my drag king character, I do prefer he and him, but obviously I'm not always him. So lesbian, Lauren, she, her. So I guess for me, I grew up on the East Coast in the States, and gay, homo, leather, whatever, those were probably the words we used a lot more. And so I grew up on the East Coast, and then I ended up moving out to the West Coast to go to university at Berkeley, University of California, Berkeley, which is quite an open-minded school for some people. It's right outside of San Francisco. So when I was out there, I came from kind of a more like white bread area, you know, in like middle to upper class in the States. And I wanted a new experience, which is why I chose to go to the West Coast. I wanted something that was a bit more open-minded, and San Francisco gave it to me. Before I moved out there, I would have identified myself as straight. And then I opened up real quickly and very much enjoyed that. So I guess, for me, what I find really important about the word queer, I do find that it encompasses LGBTQ plus, you know, because when I first came out, my brother beat me to it. He came out in high school. I came out a few years later, and he was like, I'm gay. He's like, gold star gay. And I'm like, well, I've had experiences with men, and, you know, so I would consider myself bi. And I think sometimes when you identify as bi, he's like, oh, you know, you're just going to, you know, choose the easiest thing and marry a guy and this and that. And I do feel that sometimes you do get that within the community. So I think, kind of like what Isaac was saying, the nice thing about the word queer is it does allow for the gray area, or for you to, I mean, you know, we're fluid, right? So it allows that possibility for change, and it allows that possibility to incorporate people. So for me, words I identify with queer would be struggle, strength, community, love, support. Because we also can't forget that queer, right now, I find it very empowering, but there was a time when people used it as an awful slur. And I think we can't forget the people that fought, died, and still struggle, and still are doing all these things. And I don't think we can forget that, because we have to embrace that, because they were the people that helped us make this a more positive word. So I find it really empowering, because I find that when we use this word, we're choosing to embrace a part of ourselves that we can't change. And in that, we're choosing love.
Definitely, Lauren, thank you so much. And going back to what Lexi was saying before, we're talking from a very Western perspective. So in other parts of the world, we're still going through these struggles, and that word is charged with a lot of baggage. Meghna, how about you?
Hi, I'm Meghna. My pronouns are she, her. So I grew up closeted in India many years. And I think when I first came out as a lesbian, I was very much like, take a man, replace it with woman, that's pretty much it, you know, and I don't think I necessarily examined like, I guess, the heteronormative assumptions of what relationships are, what has value. And just as an example, I know Orly is talking about it in the chat. I mean, I didn't even realize, you know, I just assumed that homosexuality was stigmatized in India. It just was, but I didn't realize it was an overhang of the British Empire and the laws of the British Empire, just like also in Kenya, like Orly just mentioned. And I think, you know, like Chico said, it's all the different forms of oppression and how they intersect. It matters so much in how we experience queerness. And I think for me, the most important thing about queerness is how we relate to each other. So it's like friendship and community and, you know, the sort of solidarity we have. And yeah, which can be, I think, as important, more important than monogamous relationships. And I think, yeah, the quote that I like, which by Bell Hooks, is like, queer is not about who you're having sex with. That can be a dimension of it, but as being the self that is at odds with everything around it and has to invent and create and find a place to thrive and speak and to live. Yeah, so that for me is queerness.
Fascinating, Meghna. Thank you so much. We just started and you just introduced the quote of the whole conversation. Fantastic. I wanted to ask Tom next about his coming out experience, and how old were you, and how does this affect your relationship with your family, friends, and with your surrounding?
So I kind of have two coming out experiences, in the sense of sort of, I fell in love, I'm trans man, so I grew up till I was 21 living as female, and then I sort of came out as a man when I was about 21, about 5 years ago. And that process for me was completely different to my process as like a bisexual person. So that when being bisexual, I kind of never really came out in the kind of typical way that I imagined what coming out should mean. It was kind of like a sort of slow process over the process of almost like 5-10 years of just sort of people gradually knowing. And because I was quite confused about my sexuality as well, I wasn't really sure how I felt, because I knew I had a preference for men, but I also like fell in love with a girl. So it was sort of, I felt like, was I allowed to call myself that or something, because of the fact I felt I wasn't bi enough, basically. But which I think is quite a common experience. But yeah, so that process, like, so different. Like when I came out when I was 21, I sort of came out to the closest people to my life, and it came out within, like, to most people within the space of 6 months. And it was quite hard for some people. Whereas I think for me, being bi, people either just dismissed it or were accepting. It wasn't really so much a thing of like, there wasn't, some people when I came out as trans was sort of upset or struggled to understand. Other people were very accepting. I was very lucky, because I feel like, because a lot of the friends that I had had for many years were part of the queer community, or if they weren't, they were still quite accepting, quite open-minded. In terms of family, I already had quite a strained relationship with my family, just completely unrelated to my sexuality or gender. So I think that definitely meant that for me, the sort of those relationships were already very strained, and then becoming sort of like the token queer of my family meant that I do feel quite separated from my family now. But I think that that was already in place for me. Like that was probably already my path anyway. So I do think that because of that, my relationship with being queer is quite different from like other people I know who've had like familial rejection because of it. Because even though I've sort of had elements of that, like strained relationships because of it. I know that it's mostly not to do with that. They were already very strained relationships. But it's amazing to see how it's meant that because I changed so much when I came out as well. So when I came out as trans, I became so much more confident in myself as well. So a lot of my relationships, I think, are a lot better now, because my relationship with myself is so much better. And also, like, my relationship with my sexuality as well is so much better now as well. So on that side of things, it's like I'm much more open about my sexuality now than I ever was. So I'm, because I'm very open about being trans, and I'm very, like, just because in some ways I think it's a privilege. Like, I'm in a situation, I think, as like a white cis passing trans man, to be pretty open about my identities and quite like educate people quite regularly and not really have to worry too much about super backlash. You have people behave like dicks, but mostly you just be like, it's just words, and you can kind of just be like, well, so so in that sense, yeah. So my coming out process, I think it's one of those things where you think coming out is like a thing and then you realize it's for life. So I definitely think that's probably something everyone is gonna talk about, but it's definitely, I think, a universal thing of the idea of coming out is like you come out and then you're done. But obviously it's actually like a journey of like, I'm always explaining to people, like on a monthly basis, probably, like the fact that I'm trans, what that means, and dealing with those kind of questions. And questions about my sexuality as well, particularly because I recently entered into like a polyamorous relationship. So I'm sort of learning that that's almost like a coming out thing as well, where I'm like having to come out as polyamorous now. So it's definitely, it's a journey, I think, coming out.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Tom. Yeah, and I love that you just said that, because as we said before, we all come from very different backgrounds, and for us, all of our experiences with the word queer, but also our coming out stories are very, very unique. And there isn't that thing of just like coming out, like there's not that one event in our lives, like you said, like we keep on doing it through our whole lives. I'm really happy to hear that you're doing well, in spite of everything. So thank you so much for sharing that. I'm going to ask Tanisha the same question. And also I want to know if you consider that coming out is still a rite of passage today.
Cool. Yeah, coming out. So I was 26, so very, quite late on in terms of lots of people that I know and their stories that I've listened to. And it was quite, it was new to me at that time. So it kind of, this woman came to my life and I was like, wow, I did not know I could feel this way. And so it was quite a shock. And quite a surprise and a discovery for myself, and there was a lot to battle with. And I was married to a man, and it was very complicated, very painful, very transformative period of my life. And I came from a very rigid Christian background, very prescriptive, a lot of legislation around everything, but certainly a lot of awful rhetoric around people that are gay and what happens to them, and how do you be Christian and be gay? Those things are not really compatible, but if you are, then you better be single, just lots of things. And certainly growing up in my household, there were again a lot of bad things that were said, like horrific things that again I won't even repeat because no one needs to hear them. But again, that's kind of the Caribbean background, and again, very Christian, colonial kind of upbringing. So there was a lot to contend with in terms of, childhood friends, even things around the church I was brought up in and married in. There was kind of, everyone had to know straight away. So there was no privacy. And I'm quite an open person anyway. So, if you're my friend, most things about me. My work is around mental health. I'm all about destigmatization and talking about things. So, I am one of those people. But it was a lot to go through in a public way in terms of, church members knowing, getting emails from various people around my choices, and people being very concerned about me. And even attempted exorcisms that obviously didn't work. Because why would it? but yeah, and I think, and wow, so I mean, it's a good, you know, it's all come good now. I'm in a great place, you know. That wasn't so great then, but things are great now. And I think in terms of rite of passage, you know, I worked with young people for a number of years, sort of 11 to 18, and it's been amazing hearing from them. You know, I had lots of people come out to me, which has been a privilege, but I think also it's been more few and far between that people are struggling. It feels like more of a kind of, oh yeah, I'm this, I'm that, I'm pan. People have the language, you know, I'm queer, I'm this, and it feels quite free. And maybe it's because I'm in Bristol, maybe it's the location in terms of where I am. But it's been amazing to see that. That was not my upbringing or the people I knew around me. So yeah, seeing young people just sort of not even necessarily have to come out, and just talking about it freely and it being fluid has been very inspiring.
Thank you for sharing that. And going back to what Lexi was saying about this being a Western view, sexual education in schools gives young people all these tools to be able to speak about these things and how they feel and how they relate. And I think it's so important. And I wish that soon we can see this spreading around the world as well. I'm conscious of time, so I'm going to move on to the next question. And I wanted to ask Kate, how long did it take you to feel comfortable in your skin when you came out, or when you discovered yourself as a lesbian woman, and how did that affect your relationship with other people?
My goodness. Well, very much like Tanisha, I had my first girlfriend at university, and when I graduated from my undergraduate degree, I then went back home for a time, and I immediately went back in the closet, which sounds crazy, but this was the 1980s, early 1980s, and it was not a comfortable time to be gay. The whole of society, the whole of family, and I remember, it was Section 28 as well, and the whole thing was horrible.
Can you please explain for people who are not in the UK what that means, Section 28?
Section 28 was a government piece of legislation which made it illegal for local authorities, and that at the time included virtually all teaching establishments, to, as the Act said, to promote homosexuality. And it wasn't so much that, as far as I'm aware, I don't think there were ever any prosecutions under Section 28, but it made local authorities so fearful of prosecution that teachers dare not mention being gay, any matters of sexuality, gender in classes. It was just, the whole thing was silenced. That being the time of the AIDS crisis as well, at its height. That meant that the national press were vehemently anti-gay, and it was a very, very uncomfortable time. And like Tanisha, I got married to a man as well. Talk about bad mistakes. Sorry, guys. Yeah, and yeah, I mean, obviously that was a disaster. And it took me a few years. I mean, I had to kind of, I remember when I came out to my partner then, and he said to me, "So do you mean that everything that you've told me up to now has been a lie?" And I said, "Yeah, I guess I am, kind of, but the biggest lie was the one that I told myself." And from that point, it's been a slow process to get comfortable with the identity. I'm there now. I don't give a monkeys about what anybody thinks of me, or, you know, I'm beyond that now, well and truly. But it's taken a long time. I think that a lot of the hangovers from having an upbringing at that time meant that there's an awful lot of residual guilt and fear that you carry with you. And it's taken a long time to shrug that off, but I'm happy, totally happy now, happy in my identity. I've got there, and I don't give a damn what anybody else thinks.
Cheers to that. Fantastic. Kate, thank you so much for sharing that. And thank you so much also for touching on these things that we were living through in the 80s, those of us who were born at the time. And I wanted to ask Isaac, when you came out, what were the most pressing issues in the world and in the community at the time?
So So for me, my teens, my late teens, my 16, 17, 18, 19-year-old coincided at the beginning of the AIDS crisis. It was the fear of the unknown, not knowing how it's contracted, not knowing what to do about it, not knowing how people were going to deal with this. It was not only a pandemic and like it is now. It was a curse. It was something that people wished on us. This was something that people punished us with, saying that you deserve this coming to you. So that was really the most hurtful part of it, growing up in that environment as a 16-year-old, and this is what you hear. And even for a 16-year-old, you make your decisions about what am I going to do with my life, where am I going to go, who am I going to live, and coming out at that moment to an innocent 16-year-old meant nothing less than a death sentence. I'm going to go into this community and XYZ, I'm going to die. It was very scary. The fear of the unknown was tremendous. Thank God a lot has happened since. Science has advanced and technology has advanced, and to a lot part also society has advanced, that we no longer view it in the same way that we used to. And actually we were watching It's a Sin, the series, and it really highlights a lot of that. And the American counterpart is called The Normal Heart, which was a movie, and a lot of it takes place in Fire Island, which we have a house over there too. But all these people who were decimated and they're no longer with us. Back in the days, it was funerals after funerals after funerals. But thank God we have moved away from that. I think that the biggest part on this point is moving on and going towards societal acceptance and equality. That's really the struggle these days. And that's really what dictates us going forward. And I'm really happy that we are in such a better place now than we were when I was 16 years old.
Definitely. And I think shows like the ones that you have mentioned are really useful to show people these days, not only younger generations, but also those who were living at the same time that we were going through the struggles, but because these things weren't spoken about, they didn't really know what we were going through. So it has been a very, very important educational tool. I wanted to ask Chico, when you were growing up, what sort of inequalities did you experience that are not the same today? Have they gotten worse? Have they gotten better?
Really interesting question. So I think growing up for me, I was really fortunate as someone who had Indian parents and an only child. I think they somehow wanted a gay kid because between the age of 4 and 10, I was a figure skater, not the most conventional of sports to undertake as a boy. But then, when I came out to my mum at the age of 15, 16, she was so accepting of it. And I was so lucky. And it's not something that everyone from our community experiences. I have other friends from the Asian subcontinent whose parents have said that, if you are going to go down this choice or lifestyle, then you will be disowned and you will not be included in the inheritance and things like that. And I think for me, and this is now in today's day and age, which is really sad. I get that culturally we may well find that we have a different relationship and expectation on our own children. And we may well expect them to be unhappy because it saves our face or doesn't have that level of shame. But for that to then be imparted on someone completely innocent into this, who would have to marry someone where their parents know that that's a lie, I find sometimes a little difficult. So I try and do as much as I can within the community and sort of role model. Meghna and I both role model with an organization called Diversity Role Models. And we go into schools quite often that are very multiculturally diverse. And we kind of start showing and exposing what gay life is and what being queer can be, and it's not a negative thing, and start helping to challenge some of those dimensions and perceptions that might not necessarily have been as accepted a few years back. But hopefully we're making little progresses here and there.
We are indeed, definitely. And Meghna, do you think that coming out as saying that openly that you're queer is considered an act of defiance these days?
I mean, just give me a second. So I think I don't necessarily, I think it really depends on the context. I think that you know, and it depends what you mean by queer now. I think there's certainly things that are more acceptable. But I think, for example, the most important part for me now is that there's, you know, we inhabit so many different identities. Like I would say I inhabit an identity as a queer person, as a cis person, you know, as an Indian brown person, as, you know, someone who's got like some financial privilege, as an able-bodied person. And I think that kind of having that intersectional lens of, you know, all the different ways in which we exist, and sort of being able to see those different perspectives is kind of the most important thing. I think that the problem becomes when you kind of get put into boxes, like Orly just said, you know, also in the chat, and when you come out as queer and then people put you into a box, and then it's very hard to get out of that box, and then you feel like you're performing yourself. And I think that, you know, over the course of sort of my life, I've been put into many boxes. I've kind of put myself into many boxes. First it was, oh, I'm a lesbian, and then I have to, you know, just be like a sexual lesbian in the way that it's performed in London. And then now I no longer identify as a lesbian, I identify more as queer, and also as a non-monogamous person. And then how does that, you know, kind of come out, and then also as an anti-racist, which I think is increasingly important, especially right now, as, you know, against the sort of extremely bad transphobia that is, you know, in this country especially so bad, with, you know, the government equalities minister using the trans issue to say that they're moving away from fashionable injustices like homophobia and racism. It's just, it can be an act of defiance to say you're queer, but it really depends what queer means, I think. And I definitely think it's important that we kind of essentially stand for everyone, you know, not just for the few, not just for the things that affect us, but the things that affect all of us, so that we're kind of working for the many rather than the few. And yeah, another quote I'm going to give here is, you know, Audre Lorde famously said, there's no such thing as a single issue struggle, because we don't lead single issue lives. And I think that that's true for all of us. And I think just listening to what everyone is saying, I can definitely see that everyone's had such different experiences of growing up, and like such different, I guess, things they've struggled against, that, you know, we can't put people into boxes. So the defiance has to be against the box even. Yeah.
And I'm really happy that you touched on the intersectionality that Chico was mentioning before, because we're not one-dimensional. And even if we're all queer, that doesn't mean anything in the end, because we are completely different to each other. I wanted to ask Kavita, if it were in your power, how would you imagine the LGBTQ plus community in the future?
That's a really good question. I just wanted to riff of what people were saying. I also come from an Asian background, and as I run a Asian martial arts club, it's sort of really interesting sort of how different these conversations are across the globe when we're looking at it from a sort of British English perspective, or a London perspective, I think. To answer your question, I thought maybe I'd try and give you a framework. There is what you can do locally. So for me, I'm thinking a lot about trans issues and making sure that the club that I run is as inclusive as possible. So people who come through the door understand that they are accepted sort of wherever they're coming from, wherever they are through a transitioning process, and that we take the language that we're using, both on the marketing, on the website, etc., to make it, but also because it's in Japanese, also translating all of that into something that feels really inclusive. The next thing that I'm thinking about is that our influence isn't just as a club level, it's at sort of a federation level. So I can actually influence the sports federation and make sure that then they're changing their competition style. So it's not about gender, you know. At club level, I will punch a man and I will take them out. But at national level, I'm not allowed to. And that's my experience of growing up playing football, right? Where football was banned right through to the 80s because I'm female. Where do I want to get to? Is I want to be able to make sure that anyone who identifies as trans can compete at the Olympics, compete at the highest level of that sport. And if you take that framework, that's what I wanted to see us do for every single sector, industry, anything that we have influence over. Start local, go national, go global. And actually, I want to see that done at country. We've touched upon it in different places about how colonialism, how our heritage influences this. We need to start right here in the UK. You know, it's not good enough that we have these little bits in London and Brighton and Manchester. Great as it is, we need it to be across the whole country. Then we need to start reaching out across the globe. My experience of that is that, you know, I also have a difficult relationship with my parents who left India 40 years ago. But when I go out to my family across the world, they have progressed. They're very accepting of who I am as an individual. And so I think that's kind of the framework that I want to leave you guys with.
Amazing. And I completely agree with you that change has to come from within. And by doing this change from the grassroots, and obviously the only way that we're going to be able to influence the rest of society. Thank you so much for sharing that. And in contrast, I want to hear from Lexi, asking the same question to her. How, if it were in your power, Lexi, how would you see the future of the LGBTQ plus community, especially you being down there in Africa at the moment?
Yeah. So yeah, I didn't get to introduce myself earlier. I forgot. Sorry, but
sorry about that. My bad.
No, it's fine. So I'm a co-founder also of an activist collective called Queer Here Collective. It's a network of activists from all over the globe that are working with and for gender and sexually diverse communities. So we support activists and grassroots organisations through emergency funds for urgent action and by providing technical advocacy support and networking. And so when I looked at this question, I'm thinking of it from how we, from outside of, I guess, in the West or outside in countries where it's not criminalised, how can we support activists and organisations or communities where they don't have protections, particularly legal protections where it's criminalised. So from my work in Kazakhstan, in Kyrgyzstan, Central Asia, the Middle East, I'd like to see a focus more on under-highlighted communities and more focus from, I guess, our side, outside of, at an international level. And I guess I support the advocacy and technical support to those communities. And also that's important because in some of these countries where it is criminalized, there are legal restrictions on a practical level. There are legal restrictions for these activists registering their organizations even. So there are issues with getting funds to these activists and advocates. So I'd like to see some flexibility with donors around financing and how we can get funds to some of these activists that are doing really amazing work and really at high risk and are being persecuted by their governments. And I'd like to see us also invest in supporting countries where gender and sexually diverse folks are being criminalised, to enable them to be able to collect data and evidence on their communities, the communities that they belong to, so that we can also use that as leverage for high-level advocacy purposes. So I think those things are really important. And I guess what's important to the Queer Here Collective and why we have activists from all over the globe as part of this community. I think what's important is that we need to centre, make space and push forward and step aside and let the most vulnerable and marginalised in our movement and to really lead the movement. So trans folks, Indigenous and Two-Spirit folks, people of colour, people from ethnic minorities. We need to make sure that they're centered and leading. And I think that, and for us here sitting with our organisations in the UK and the US and wherever, that we should be supporting grassroots organisations in different countries where it is criminalised. So that's what I would leave you guys with.
Thank you so much, Lexi. Thank you so much for the beautiful work that you do. And I'm glad that you touched on that, because it's also important for the attendees to know that it is 2021. And even if it feels like 2040, we don't know which year we're living in anymore, but it's 2021 and there are still countries in the world where being queer is criminalized, and even with death penalty. And we're very fortunate, I think, to be living in the countries that we're living in, but not everyone has the same luck that we have. I'm very conscious of time. We're running a little bit over. I just want to ask the last question, starting with Peter. What would you tell your younger self, Peter? You're muted, Peter, sorry.
Yeah, I just wanted to start actually with a story about something I noticed today, which illustrates how things have changed. I told you at the beginning what the attitude was to people in the civil service who were gay, that they were potential security risks. I cycled past the Treasury building this afternoon, and on the top of the Treasury building there was a rainbow flag with the Union Jack in the corner. So this was like the red ensign. The rainbow flag had been appropriated by the state and was being flown on that building, and so that is something that's changed dramatically. Well, I think my younger self is not really the person I would want to tell, because things have changed so much. I mean, when I if I had been actively gay in my 20s, I'd be dead by now, because I'd probably have caught AIDS. So that's not really the younger self that I want to talk to. I would tell my younger self to be yourself, to do what is right for you, and be willing to be prepared to explain it to other people, but don't be scared of doing what you feel, what feels right for you.
Thank you so much for sharing that, Peter. How about you, Lauren?
I guess what I would tell my younger self is that you're worthy. Because at the end of the day, all we have is one life, right? And you're the one that's going to have to go and look at yourself in the mirror. So you need to make sure that you're living it to your fullest truth, and that you're also just being kind, loving, and accepting towards others. Because in hopefully doing that, you can create understanding amongst people, and just try to bring people together. But it first starts with yourself. Love and accept yourself.
Thank you so much. How about you, Tom?
I was just thinking about what Peter was saying about how much things have changed, and I was thinking about my own upbringing, because growing up, I'd never even heard of a trans man. I didn't know that a trans man existed. I'd only ever seen sort of trans women represented in media, and always in pretty negative ways generally. So I think if, I remember like last Christmas, before COVID, there were sort of trans flags in a lot of storefronts. And there were, things for LGBT, like Pride Month and stuff. Like I was, it was sort of insane to me when I had grown up in an environment where it was never even talked about. Being trans is not even sort of a thing almost. It was just like invisible. So I think I'd like to sort of give my younger self a little snapshot of that and say, look, things change, I think, Thank you,
Tom. How about you, Lexi?
Oh, wow. I came from quite a conservative family, Greek Australian family. I think I would just say, a bit similar to Tom, hang in there, things change. And I think also being estranged from my family because of my sexuality, I think also you'll make a family with the queer community, and you can move beyond some of the barriers and challenges to not having sort of a familial network I guess, you know, the family that you're raised in, you'll make a network, and the good things are coming with that. So yeah, I guess that would be what I would say if I could.
That's beautiful. That's beautiful, because you all are our chosen family, and I think that's the most important family. Kavita, how are you?
Remind me of the question one more time.
I just wanted to know, what would you tell your younger or your older self?
Yeah, I think all the answers so far have been brilliant. I think I'd echo what Lauren was saying. I would tell my own self to hang in there, and it's, you know, the progression, we will get there. Be yourself. Also, do therapy earlier. That would be great.
That is really beautiful advice, Carita. I want to ask Stephen, who's taking care of the chat, if there's any interesting question that you think we can ask the panel before we leave, because we're 7 minutes late.
We don't have any questions that have come through, but loads of really positive comments. I hope you've been able to see them as it's been going through. And just now, Orly has said, you know, like, one of the things that she reflects on is it's okay if people don't want to be your friend but as you're growing up, and you will be able to create this amazing family of friends. And Orly has just said, you know, she feels so proud of what she's been able to create. And some of those family members are here today. And so I think that's just absolutely beautiful, and so joyous for us to celebrate for LGBT History Month. So yeah, so I think what a lovely comment from Orly at the end.
Thank you so much, Stephen. Thank you so much, Orly. We feel the love. Thank you so much. And on behalf of Art for Good, thank you so much to all the panelists, to everyone who has joined us tonight for this really important conversation. I have learned so much from hearing all of you. Thank you for this unbelievable panel. I'm very grateful for the time that you have given us, and thank you also for sharing all your beautiful stories and anecdotes with us. Enjoy the rest of your evening, guys. Thank you so much.